Another year pinched off from our collective anus, and therefore we must suffer the inevitable splash of cold water upon the buttocks that is the top and bottom 5, before we can reach for the toilet paper of moving on with our fucking lives. And as I always remind viewers, only games covered by a ZP video in 2014 are in the running. That's my insurance policy against people demanding to know why I haven't bowed towards the east and chanted Hail Smash Brothers the minimum number of times. Just to digress for a moment, it was cunning of Smash Brothers to not have a story mode, because I'm only really interested in games that have at least some kind of narrative design and that aren't interactive toy shop windows for people who couldn't leave their comfort zone if it was in the path of a herd of charging wildebeest. But put away those prayer beads in the shape of Samus Aran's arse for a moment and get out your betting slips, because it's time to make like Sesame Street and learn how to count to 5. Speaking of refusing to leave a comfort zone even as it's being absorbed into the dank spotty folds of a fat grandmother's vagina, our 5th best game wears nostalgia like Crispy Duck wears a pancake, but in this case it's actually managing to capture the spirit and gameplay of retro action platforming, not, say, parading a bunch of geriatric characters before us in sparkly costumes in the hope we'll start throwing money and underpants. It's Shovel Knight, a game like my cock, fun, charming and manageably hard. Also, no matter how much I shake it, the last drop of piss always goes down my leg. An attempt at comedy that falls flat is the basic unit of raw despair. A game that unfailingly produces one every 5 seconds is officially worse than being held hostage by Somalian pirates. Surprisingly, I'm not talking about Sunset Overdrive, which at least has some fun gameplay as long as you keep the TV on mute, but Sacred 3, a game that utterly and completely failed at comedy, action, entertainment, game design, and getting out of the way of my gun. You know, the more I look back on Dark Souls 2, the less I think of it, at least compared to Dark Souls 1. The world doesn't feel like a vast, cohesive whole, the level design isn't great, the lighting and textures are shitty, the lore and characters just doesn't have the same grim, despair-fueled spark, none of which changes the fact that I played through the whole game like 3 times this year, so I'm putting it in 4th, mainly because it's far too late to give any awards to Dark Souls 1. That ship has sailed, realised it forgot its keys, come back, then sailed again. It's said, of course, that lightning never strikes twice in the same place. A popular, if untrue, saying, and a guideline that the Final Fantasy people should have bore in mind before they passed around the ether-soaked rags and made lightning returns. I did hesitate a little to stick in the bottom 5 a game I'm pretty sure I didn't get and wasn't for me, but then I tried to picture someone who it was for and did get it, and then that they were being introduced as my future daughter-in-law, and then I pictured myself chasing them across the croquet lawn with an elephant gun. You know me, I don't think it's been a good year unless I've lost at least one piece of furniture to a game that makes me cack my pants with the force of a shotgun blast. I thought AAA games had forgotten how to effectively pace themselves and build atmosphere, but Alien Isolation means my sofa can't get complacent just yet. Linear plot's a bit flimsy and the protagonist's a bit dull, but since that seems to be the running theme of this top 5, I'm not going to lose sleep over it. What do you want from me? This wasn't exactly a 2007 grade year. There was a time when I would have been more hesitant about putting movie franchise spin-offs into a bottom 5, as most of them only exist because someone needed to fill a space next to a film, and they would have filled the space with cakes of mulchy shit if they thought that would turn a profit. But then again, that's hardly an attitude exclusive to movie spin-offs these days, and if a game in my top 3 can be a movie spin-off, then there are still good people out there. Not on Amazing Spider-Man 2's development team, however, half of whom didn't give a shit while the other half lived in the office fish tank. I liked Spec Ops The Line, as you know. I wouldn't go so far as to petition to rename New Year's Day Hooray for Spec Ops The Line Day, but I will take the opportunity to big up games that fly the same flag, that ending the lives of endless streams of thinking, feeling human beings of varying moral character is, while entertaining, slightly grim. And that's what I liked about Wolfenstein New Order. You can almost feel the crushing weight that sits upon the shoulders of its engaging characters, but it doesn't take itself so seriously that we can't spend an hour or so killing space Nazis on the moon. Yes, you heard me right, I said killing face Yahtzees with a spoon. Well, this is about as late an entry as late gets, but you really would be hard-pressed to find worse than the last game I reviewed. I say reviewed, perhaps the better word would be autopsied. Buggy, rushed, horrible design and with dialogue as irritating as chicken wire across the plums, Sonic Boom can suck my fat cock. I'd think of a more roundabout way of saying that, but I refuse to put more effort in than the developers did. Oh how I oh how I how I owed between this and Wolfenstein. Like I said, it wasn't a great year. There weren't any games that made me go, yes, all of this, in my face. Eventually I decided that the top spot is a place for the most interesting game, if not the unqualified best one. So while it's got a main character who might as well have emitted white noise from his mouth, and what we academics call a spirograph plot, in that it traces circles but doesn't go anywhere, it's the innovative and yet deceptively simple organic storytelling mechanics that gives the edge to Shadow of Mordor, yeah, just dropping the name like it ain't no thing. And similarly, the worst game needn't necessarily be the most objectively badly made or frustrating one, but the game with the worst intentions. Sonic Boom and Spider-Man feel like the developers were all wearing oven mitts, but a game that has every advantage in the world and then calmly, decisively and deliberately puts its todger in a saucepan full of hot bleach is somehow orders of magnitude worse. It's Thief. I will never understand the logic behind AAA reboots. Here's this game people used to like, primarily for its uniqueness. Let's reboot it and make it just like everything else. I see no reason why people could be anything less than delighted. Do you think my todger's clean yet? I think the bell end's fallen off. Well, it's Cox back on the old grindstone, I suppose. We're all holidayed out and got a fresh new year ahead of us. And what better way to greet the newly birthed 2015 than to spin on our heel 180 degrees and review the last few things from 2014, still dangling off it like poo out of a fish's arse. And no, I still don't mean Smash Brothers. The Christmas break for me is a time for relaxing, using troughs and conveyor belts as dining utensils, and getting completely bombed out of my skull on cocksucking cowboys. I'm not in the right mood for confusing fast-paced spectacle in a clashing rainbow of vibrant bubblegum colours that make me throw up a veritable landslide of Ferrero Rocher. I want to play something calm, slow-paced and contemplative. So naturally I spent most of the fortnight playing a game by the developers of Serious Sam. No, really, Crow Team went and made a philosophical puzzle game, and it's called The Talos Principle, which is the kind of title that if you saw it on the board outside a cinema, your gaze would immediately ricochet off onto Transformers 9 even larger stuff breaking. But dull title aside, you can really tell it's a Crow Team game. The look's fairly unmistakable with the ancient ruins and bright contrasting sunlight and impressive skyboxes they didn't bother to fence off, in case anyone wants to explore a repeating sand texture for 20 minutes instead of the actual level where stuff happens. Although you do get frog marched back if you venture too far, which is kind of in keeping with the theme. You are an unknown consciousness that wakes up in an unknown garden where an unknown intelligence forces you to complete puzzles for an unknown reason. It's like when your parents used to make you sit in the garden and untangle the Christmas lights, and whenever you finished one, you were allowed to come in and watch one episode of The Prisoner. The occasional deliberate texture fuck-up, at least I assume they're deliberate, Crow Team, winky winky, leads us to conclude early on that we're in some kind of simulation, but as to who or what we are and why we're here, we have to piece that together from, altogether now, random documents and audio logs. I've heard some people compare this game to Portal, because that's the only point of reference these fucking millennials seem to have. First-person puzzlers existed before Portal did, you know. You can make one without having to bow towards Bellevue. I mean, just because we're being herded through dangerous puzzles by a redoubtable disembodied voice for what is heavily implied to be some kind of behavioural experiment, okay, maybe it's a bit like Portal, but Talos Principle lacks two things that I would argue are absolutely central to Portal's identity. It doesn't have an innovative central game mechanic around which all else is based, and it has absolutely no sense of humour. But you know, after games like Sunset Overdrive and Sacred 3 very deliberately not trying to be funny, I'm willing to count as a virtue. And I did like the story element. There's a lot of rather dry mythological metaphor wanking in the random documents that I mostly skimmed over, but there are also emails and blogs from people in what is presumably the real world dealing with the mundanities of life while there's some kind of unclear catastrophe hanging over them that none of them want to directly reference, and I found it all very human and engaging. Certainly motivated me to keep pushing through the puzzles, which were trying my patience by the end, and as I said, if you've a roving eye for new gameplay mechanics, you can jolly well rove off, Squire. Hope you like weighing down switches with boxes and redirecting laser beams and everything else from the Insert Puzzle Here guide to video game design. And then we introduce a time travel mechanic where you solve puzzles with temporal clones of yourself. I wish I could time travel back to the Newgrounds Flash programmer who first came up with that and hold his arms while my temporal clone punches him in the stomach. There are also a few obscure object mechanics that the game doesn't explain properly but bases puzzles around regardless. It's possible, for example, to put boxes on top of the roving proximity mines. It's not fair if you don't make all the rules clear. If I'm stuck in a puzzle game, I prefer it to be because I'm a big thicky bobo who can't figure out where all the pieces go, not because one of the pieces was still in the box. Forgive me if it didn't occur to me to go near the bleeping explodey death ball and repurpose it as a dessert trolley. The puzzles we complete in order to collect keys that let us advance to new worlds and eventually escape. They also draw out the pace at which we acquire new story nuggets, so if the puzzles feel kind of vacuous, it's because they could be replaced by literally anything else. Even in context, it's admittedly busy work. It's Link's problem again, forever having to prove our sodding worth, because the ancient ones never even considered that there are probably a great many terribly unworthy people who could figure out how to redirect a laser beam. The game may be overlong, as the puzzles seem to be running out of ideas by the end, to say nothing of all the optional ones. There are hidden stars in many levels, and that's all the clues you're getting. There's a hidden star somewhere in this huge cluttered map with tons of unused space, so Serious Sam worthy you'd almost expect headless suicide bombers to come screaming round the corner at any moment. Strap on that truffle-sniffing nose and good luck to you, Mr. Piggy. Yeah, not bothering, thanks. Also, there are optional puzzles that unlock helpers to assist you with other puzzles. I'm having a bit of trouble parsing that logic. Hey, I'm the kind of walking paradox that plays puzzle games but can't be bothered to solve puzzles, and in order to avoid having to solve a puzzle, I will now solve a puzzle, which will unlock a thing that will solve the first puzzle for me, and by solve I apparently mean give me a one-line clue as to the solution, which left me a little bit put out, because for the amount of effort involved, I was expecting at least a short walkthrough, and at the end perhaps to get tossed off with a smile. So in brief, the gameplay is like so many polystyrene packing peanuts in that it kind of feels like it's there to fill the space between the interesting parts, but honestly after completing it, or at least all the non-optional bits, I can't deny I left the game quite satisfied and prepared to recommend. The fact that I still wanted to keep solving puzzles, to explore more gorgeous scenery, get to the bottom of the mystery, and argue philosophy with the MS-DOS prompt, attests enough that the game is engaging and intelligent, which is all the more noteworthy considering where it came from. I mean, you ask Serious Sam to redirect laser beams, he'd probably just redirect his bollocks into your eye sockets. Random documents and audio logs. We find them stuck to notice boards, we find them under dogs. We're gonna put them in a file and give it a review, and we're bored of all the gameplay but we've nothing else to do. Man, you don't see this kind of thing much these days. A title consisting of 2 adjectives. Remakes of nostalgia games that rely on crowdfunding to pay for all the rose-tinted glasses, on the other hand, that's slightly more common. But let me skip to the end for a moment.